My name is Doug Griffes. I graduated from Lehigh in 1970 with a bachelor's in civil engineering. The latter 60s was actually a very interesting time to be in school, with a lot of traditional ways of thinking being challenged. And it was only late in my time at Lehigh that I was able to connect my passion for the environment with what I guess you would consider to be very traditional understanding of what civil engineering was all about. That made my time at Lehigh from that point forward a whole lot more interesting and ultimately pointed me in the direction of an incredible career. I was fairly active in campus politics when I was at Lehigh, starting with the freshman class council and then moving on from there to the student body council, which was known at that time as Arcadia. Um, there was a whole lot of organizing going on at that time around national and global causes. And we certainly had our share of protests, demonstrations, and even a student strike in the spring of 1970. But one cause that got a lot of attention at Lehigh and the country as a whole at that time was the environment. Several of us got together and created a group that became known as the Lehigh Ecology Action Group. This was kind of a unique organization because we were student-led, but we had really inspirational faculty who were closely involved, including probably the first professor of ecology that anyone ever knew of, Professor Trembley. And also we were closely connected to the community. Together, we went on to organize a great campus event around the first Earth Day celebration on April 22nd, 1970. For me, after that, it was pretty easy to figure out the path I wanted to follow. But this was still the Vietnam era, and I had a low draft number, so I spent the next 3 years in the Navy. After that, I found an incredible job in the Palo Alto office of one of the premier environmental engineering consulting firms at that time, a company by the name of Metcalf and Eddy, that literally wrote the book on wastewater engineering, and the latest edition really right there in the Palo Alto office. It didn't hurt me that the guy who ran the office and offered me the job was a Lehigh grad by the name of Frank Burton, and Frank became one of my great mentors in my career. I started off doing research and writing manuals on natural wastewater treatment systems for the newly formed EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency. And for me, that opened up all kinds of doors in my career. At that time, I was able to undertake a master's program in environmental engineering at night at nearby San Jose State University. And then after that gave me the opportunity to start traveling. I ended up spending much of my career with the other really big name in environmental engineering consulting, a company by the name of CH2M Hill, and spent much of that time doing really interesting stuff across the spectrum of water and wastewater, with things like wastewater reuse in particular, and a lot of utility institutional building in a lot of very interesting places, and most of those places being in the developing world. Now that I'm mostly retired, I spend a good part of my time working as a volunteer with a nonprofit by the name of Water for People, doing a lot of the same stuff, but really at a different scale, but doing it also for people who really need it the most.
Hi, I'm Pete Skinner. I graduated from Lehigh in 1969 and 1970. I got 2 degrees. It was a great experience for me. I was the class of 1970, I guess, or 1969.
What was your major?
My major was civil engineering, and I also got a degree in arts as well. A 5-year term. It was a great 5 years.
What were you involved with at Lehigh?
Well, at Lehigh, I was involved in a lot of things. Perhaps the most memorable are all the rock and roll bands I played in. That was really great fun. I was involved with Ecology Action. I started the sports car club, and in general, I worked very, very hard on the engineering side of things too.
What were the highlights of your career?
When I graduated from Lehigh, I was very fortunate to land a job with the Attorney General in the state of New York. I moved to Manhattan, and for the next 33 years, I worked on a whole array of big litigations that involved everything from the Love Canal case, plutonium transport. I worked on climate change, and in so doing, made a lot of environmental policy gains in so many different areas. I was very fortunate to have a great people to work with and to make a lot of difference in that job. I also worked quite hard on whitewater conservation advocacy. That took about 20 years of my life as well if I wasn't working for the Attorney General. Now I build solar systems on multifamily commercial jobs, and I design modern plumbing systems, a revolution that I'm trying to change all across America.
What was your favorite Lehigh memory?
Oh, I had so many great memories at Lehigh. I don't know where to start. Perhaps the most riveting one was the time I took our super duper bed racer on a trip down Upper Sayre Drive. And as I went around that corner right by Delta Chi, the whole thing was drifting through the corner, and there was the campus cops. I did not crash into them, but it was very exciting.
What advice would you give to current Lehigh students?
I'd say get involved with people who are making change. At the Attorney General's office, I used so many volunteers, and together they and I made difference all across America, and especially in New York. So volunteer if you can't get paid, because in the end, I ended up hiring so many of the volunteers because they became indispensable. You bring to the job your intellect, and you can become indispensable and make a difference all the time.
I spent my career with Monsanto, Stauffer Chemicals, Exxon, and DuPont, and mainly did air and water pollution engineering. Highlights of my career, I worked the PCB problem on the Hudson River and sampled the upper Hudson from Fort Edward down to Troy, and came up with the first estimate of how many PCBs were in the upper Hudson, and it held together. It's 250,000 pounds. Right, I got a master's degree in chemical engineering from Manhattan College in the mid-'70s while I was working in New York State. And then with Stauffer Chemicals, I did mainly air pollution. With Exxon, I did a whole variety of stuff, mainly worked on flares and became a flare expert. Yeah, I did a flare study in 82, 83 with Exxon. Right, and I chaired the group. And then in 2000, or 1999, I joined DuPont and continued with flare work for them, and then retired from DuPont in 16. So that's basically my career.
So hello, everyone. My name is Katharine Targett Gross, and I'm the Sustainability Officer at Lehigh University. The Office of Sustainability is really excited to have 3 Lehigh alums with us today. Doug Griffes, Bruce Davis, and Pete Skinner are here to have a conversation and share their experience with starting the first Earth Day celebration at Lehigh in 1970. So Bruce, Pete, and Doug, set the scene for us. Give us a little bit of context. What was happening at Lehigh in 1970?
The latter 60s, it was kind of interesting. It was a very interesting time.
Vietnam was happening, and it was the first year of the draft where they picked numbers for your birthday.
Now, was there a culture around, environmentalism and sustainability? I know at the time there wasn't an Office of Sustainability, but I know an Ecology Action Group existed. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, actually, Ecology Action didn't exist. We started it.
Okay.
And that was something that happens as a result of a lot of issues that we were all talking about, and certainly the three of us also were fortunate enough to be in courses with faculty where we were kind of tuned into the subject, but it became obvious that, and that's what we did.
So the
Anyway.
three of you have had very successful careers. I know that you've mentioned Professor McNamara. I know that Professor Trembley was also sort of important in shaping your experiences. Could you talk a little bit about what role did they serve in enhancing your Lehigh experience and setting you up for success in your future career?
Well, I'll start. I was mesmerized by McNamara. He was a unique individual.
Yeah, very unique.
And you guys can back me up on that. But anyway, one thing he did, every summer he'd fly into the permafrost areas of northern Canada or Alaska, I guess it was. And
Well, no, he went to Antarctica. What didn't he?
He may have done that too, but one year he went to Alaska. And he got dropped off by the bush pilot. And he was there for 3 or 4 weeks and went back to the pickup point. And nobody showed up. So, after a while, he said, holy moly, I'm going to freeze out here. So I'm going to walk back. And he walked back and he walked into the airport and knocked on the door and opened it and said to the pilot, hi, I'm here. And the guy said, holy, I forgot. And found the Post-it note, had fallen off his his bulletin board and fallen behind the desk. But that was just every adventure you could think of McNamara had.
And, I think Trembley actually retired that year, did he not? Because he had started back in the 30s. He was the first professor of ecology. Most people didn't know what ecology was. So I think one of the more profound things that he did is kind of raise the consciousness of what that whole study area was. And he was one of the ones that actually encouraged us to start as a student-led group and really kind of provided the inspiration for us to get going with ecology action.
Could you talk a little bit more about what it was like starting Ecology Action? Who was involved? What was the mission of that group on campus?
So I was kind of active in campus politics during the time I was there. And actually I was on Arcadia, which was the student council. And so we, at that time, had groups that were starting on campus, and the whole process of organizing was something that I think people were used to. Organizations like SDS, for instance, started. And through the system that was already there for us. And it was looking back on it, it was actually kind of a formal process. We had a constitution, we had meetings, and I'm not sure how long that organization lasted after we left. There was a lot of discussion at the time about the impact of driving automobiles with oil or oil products.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the issues that we focused on in Earth Day. By the way, one other issue that was big at the time was Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, and the impact of expanding populations and limited resources, and being able to steward those resources. So that had a big impact on me.
So what was it like being involved in bringing Earth Day to Lehigh? What did Lehigh's first Earth Day look like?
I recall the weather being good and a pretty good turnout.
We had a fair.
Right.
And what was involved in that Earth Day fair?
So it was out near the flagpole. It was central to the campus. It turned out to be a great spring day, so that was fortunate. And it was interesting, and certainly looking back and reading the brown and white to see how many other groups were involved with us. So we had the band actually playing out there, and we had events that went for most of the day. And so we had what was happening out at the flagpole during the daytime itself, and then a seminar at night. We had one guest speaker, Paul Petzold, who was the leader of the National Outdoor Leadership School from Lander, Wyoming, and then a panel of speakers. So really it was, it followed kind of a format that a lot of other Earth Days had in other locations of what was called at the time teach-ins, just bringing information, different perspectives. And so it worked out well. It was really well attended, turned out to be a high impact event.
And how was the celebration perceived on campus? So you said it was well attended. Was the response generally positive? Did it get people excited and thinking about the environment?
Well, I think so. Yeah, it certainly. I think there was a general awareness of it, which that's a huge step when you can get a broader audience to know at least a little something. So I think it was something that everybody was aware of. Certainly looking back at the brown and whites, it was on the front page for a number of days.
So 50 years have gone by since the first Earth Day, and Earth Day is really transformed into a global call to action. Mm-hmm. So reflecting on your own experiences and seeing how things are today, is there anything that stands out to you?
Well, we're working on the same problems that we were working on back in the 70s with fuels and combustion and water pollution,
yep,
stormwater pollution, and we've been working on the problems. I've managed to work on the problems my whole career.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that it has been kind of remarkable to me is that this was a career that, I mean, the job was never done. I mean, there was something interesting to do, the entire time. We just got these continuous challenges, and as Bruce says, a lot of the issues are really the same.
And looking ahead, what is some key progress that you would like to see the U.S. and really the world take over the next 10 years to really further the environmental movement?
Well, one thing is that it's not going to be solved instantaneously. Like, they want to get us off fossil fuels. Well, we can get off fossil fuels, but it has to be done gradually. It can't be done snap fashion, in my opinion. Yeah. I don't know, you guys.
One of the things that is, since I've been working in the solar world for a dozen years now, the technology is pretty clear, especially for, the main ones like hot water and photovoltaics and wind. Now the PV and wind is as cheap as coal plants. So the way is clear. We can get there, and it's just a question of whether the government will get behind doing that.
I think that actually what you've heard here is that a lot of the technology problems have answers. I mean, we can deal with the technology, and we've certainly got the capability as a country right now. But still, one of the biggest needs is social and, I hate to say it, but political change and evolution, so that we can commit to working together to actually solve this problem. Mm-hmm. So I think it's social and political, And actually, that's one of the things we learned at Lehigh.
Yeah, that's right.
That was one of the messages of Earth Day. And that's still true today.